All right, ladies, it's time to get started.
We're ready. We're just
right.
talking away.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Cathedra webinar. We are coming to you live on October 2nd, 2025. If anybody in the room is an NLC webinar first timer, know that our Cathedra webinars get their name from the Creek word for learning. And today you're going to be learning about developing engagement plans for clean energy projects, specifically frameworks for community outreach and planning. This is going to be from your instructors, Michelle L. Holliday, who is president of Michelle Holliday and Associates, as well as Catherine Cole, who is founder and CEO of Kit Cole Consulting, LLC. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center. We're also thrilled that you could tune in for the webinar today. If you could follow along while I read the disclaimer aloud, this webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. And then just a friendly reminder, we do have our copyright infringement law printed here. So just know that the webinar materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, as well as other intellectual property laws. Now that you are on the system, we want you to know that should you want to check out the slides later on, or if you want to view the recording once I post it tomorrow, you can find that in the courses section under the Developing Engagement Plans for Clean Energy Projects series course. And there is actually a link for the slides for you in the chat already. It's today's presentation slides, and there's an Adobe link. And then you can also find that link in the shared notes. Moving forward, anytime you want to join one of the webinars, you'll log in just like you did today, and you'll click that green banner at the top of your screen. Anytime the NLC has a webinar going on active live at that moment, you will see that green banner at the top of your screen. We do typically ask that you join with listen-only capabilities because we are recording the webinar, so it just helps us to cut down on any audio feedback in the recording. But if you do join unmuted, don't worry, I can go in there and mute you for you. Not a big deal. If you find that my voice is coming out of a different device that you would like, maybe you're trying to use a Bluetooth speaker, maybe you are trying to use your AirPods, whatever the case may be, you probably have either a phone icon like I do, or you might have a little headset icon down at the bottom of your screen if you joined without your mic. If you click on that, know it's going to bring up a list of your speaker devices, and so you can select the proper audio output for how you're trying to listen. We do, of course, encourage class participation. We want to hear those questions. We want to hear those comments. And especially if you have any kind of tech support issues that I can help you navigate through, the way that we're going to focus on interacting is through the public chat. So if you don't yet have that open, you can come up here to the messages panel that I'm highlighting. And if you click on public chat, you will see the chat open between you as well as the other webinar attendees and the instructors. That's where you'll see my link to the presentation slides. If you'd like to ask a question, make a comment, whatever it may be, just come down to the box that says send message to public chat, type what you want to say, and then you can either hit enter or you can click on this cute little paper airplane button and that'll send it in where we all can see it. In the shared notes section that you can open just below the public chat, I do have other helpful links for you in there. Again, a PDF of the slides is in there, as well as a link to our YouTube channel, the webinar feedback survey, different things like that. And I'll touch base on that later in the outro after the webinar's through. If you did join with your mic muted and I maybe just didn't catch it, you can always mute your mic down here. Or if you made a comment or a question in the chat that you think maybe we missed along the way, you could use the little raise hand feature that's all the way to the right-hand side of your screen. We do want to encourage you to kind of test out the chat for us a little bit, get that chat going. It's nice to see everyone who's here in the room learning. So you could let us know what your name is, where you're tuning in from. It's really fun to see all the different tribal nations that are represented. Your work or your role in Indian country, it might have led you to today's webinar. Maybe you're just here for personal information. That's great too. And then we would love to know your tribal affiliation. You might be a tribal employee and not have your own tribal affiliation. That's okay too. And then while you guys are taking the time to introduce yourselves in the chat, I just want to give you a quick note that we want to try our best not to click on anything in the red menu panel that's all the way to the left-hand side of your screen. Yours might just be the little icons if you don't have it expanded, but it's not one where if you click on something and it asks, hey, are you sure you want to leave the webinar? It won't do that. It's just going to pull you immediately out. Now, if you do accidentally click on it and you're taken out of the webinar to something else on the website, all you got to do is click on that green banner once again to rejoin, and it'll still be happening. You're not going to be, blocked out or anything, but I just want to give you that heads up to try your best not to click on the menu panel. And while y'all are taking the time to introduce yourselves in the chat, it is with great pleasure that I introduce your webinar instructors today, Michelle Holliday and Catherine Cole. And Kit, I have made you presenter now.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And it's great to see everybody in the chat putting in their name and their affiliation. I'm in my kitchen today in Glendale, California, and my co-presenter, Michelle Holliday. Michelle, where are you today?
Hi, everybody, and thanks, Brooke, for the introduction and all the good facts to navigate the webinar today. I'm in Maryland on the East Coast, but as Kit said, we appreciate everyone taking the time out of their schedule to join us today. And just a little background about us as we sort of lead into the webinar. Again, I'm Michelle Holliday, and I'm a member of the Iowa Tribe of Oklahoma. And I've been an instructor with the Native Learning Center about 8 years. And just about me, just briefly about my career, I've been in the energy industry and working with tribes for many years. And I'm also in the telecommunications space. And I'll hand it over to Kit.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm Kit Cole. I have a doctorate in public policy and community development. I teach at USC. I also have been a student at the University of Southern California. I'm a consultant, and I get the pleasure of getting to consult on projects along with Michelle Holliday, who is my professional colleague, but also my dear, dear friend. So this is a super fun opportunity for me because now I'm forcing Michelle to spend an hour and a half with me on Zoom talking about my favorite topic, which is community relations. And we have a lot of people putting their details in the chat, which we so appreciate. Thank you all for doing that. It's really great to see all of the folks here with us today, and welcome. Just a quick introduction or a quick invitation to you. We're going to go through this PowerPoint presentation, but we are more than happy to take your questions. I know so many of you are working on projects with tribes or, oh, Bill, thank you very much for telling me I'm choppy. I'm glad my sound is good. Keep me posted, my friend, about how I'm doing on being choppy on video. But we're excited that you're here, and thanks, Bill. And we know that a lot of you have projects either on tribal lands or out on non-tribal lands, but in affiliation or conjunction with tribes. So we're looking forward to hearing your questions about your real life challenges of working with communities, tribal communities and non-tribal communities on your projects. So put your questions in the chat as we go along. I'm going to monitor the chat, and Michelle and I will answer your questions as much as we can going forward. All right. If you can go to the chat for me one more time. Hi, Wendell. Welcome. If you're working on a project right now, and maybe you're at this webinar because you're working on this project and you're interested in community outreach, can you just put what kind of project you're working on in the chat? So just 1 or 2 words. You're working on housing, maybe you're working on clean energy, so we can get an idea of what y'all are working on. So this is the first in a 4-part webinar series that we're doing with NLC. And you're going to hear us give very broad sort of discussions about community outreach and planning, looking at project timelines, and considering who your shareholders or interested parties are relative to your projects. So it's going to be pretty broad today, but going forward in the webinar series, we're going to get more and more specific. So we encourage you, we're so glad you're here today, and to come for more detail to our next webinar, which is in December.
So Kit, I was seeing James said that he was working on a tribal utility, developing a solar project. And I was wanting to see if you're really not working on a project now, but you're in the energy space or infrastructure space, that's fine too. We just wanted to sort of get a sense. I can sort of tell from some of the introductions from you all but we just wanted to sort of gauge sort of our comments around getting ready for engagement strategies or, issues or anything like that. So if you do have that, I know Kit sort of asked specifically, or maybe you don't really want to go and tell us the projects you're working on. That's totally fine too. I know sometimes sharing that kind of information can be sensitive to some folks, but we were just trying to get an idea of where you were, relative to your projects or,
Sure.
Planning or feasibility work.
And I'll just share in the chat, I'm working on 2 quarry projects right now. I don't know that I've ever had 2 quarries that I've been working on at the same time in my consulting practice. And there's, as you can imagine, plenty of questions and concerns about quarries from the communities that are nearby to them. All right, so Michelle, I think you're going to talk a little bit about our experience, you and I together.
Yeah, so, Kit and I have been working in the energy industry for like over 30 years. And, sort of as energy professionals in transmission investment and renewables, other clients that we've had, like I have a biomass client right now. We've both worked on battery energy storage systems. I did some recent work with a company, a BEST company in New Mexico recently, just in terms of identifying if there was an opportunity with the tribe. And we've also worked with extractive industries and critical mineral work. Somewhat Kit was talking about quarries, and then also Kit is very focused on wastewater, and I'm getting more into sort of solid, sort of waste energy focus with some solar. There's a lot of interesting sort of transitions as people move away from, solar in general or wind development. I think there's some creative opportunities there that started to occur. But we have helped tribes across the country on infrastructure projects and developing actual engagement plans in the private sector, but then also with tribes. And our focus is really to sort of meet the tribe where they're at in terms of their economic development and community goals. And we're going to share a little bit about some of those experiences, and maybe you can have some takeaways. But we're really public participation practitioners, and I find that the successful energy projects, they align with the engagement plans. So it's really like not an afterthought. And so we really try to work with all different kinds of clients. And sometimes that the light bulb comes into play about, oh yeah, we have to do this. And that's what we're going to sort of talk about from the tribal perspective. Because sometimes we just don't really think about engagement in that way, right? It's always sort of trying to address a problem. I don't know, Kit, if you have any other thoughts on that, on our experience.
Yeah, I think you got it, Michelle. So we have a couple learning objectives for today's webinar. So as good instructors, we thought ahead of time about what we wanted to share with you and have you learn. And obviously the first one is what Michelle was talking about. So the community outreach approaches, principles, and ethics. And we are going to touch on that again briefly today, and then go more in depth on that in our next webinar in the webinar series. Project planning and site selection basics. I know you all know, but the site that you choose can really impact the community outreach and engagement that needs to be done. And then establishing project timelines and assessing infrastructure needs. All of these learning objectives apply whether you're working on tribal lands or you're working on non-tribal lands. So Michelle and I often do projects in conjunction with tribes that aren't actually on tribal lands. The principles that we're going to talk about today work for any kind of project. Health projects, housing, public safety, new on and off ramps, for freeways. All of those are covered in the approach that we're going to talk about today. So let's just go back to the chat. For those of you working on projects, and there were a couple of you. Could you just tell us where you are in the life of the project? So like, are you doing site selection? Are you still trying to get funding? Are you maybe deep in construction? That'll also give us some idea about how we can emphasize community engagement approaches that will help you in those specific phases of the project. All right. I see some folks in the chat. Thank you so much. Yeah, Michelle.
Can you see what is being shared on your side, on your screen? I see some of them, some of the comments. And I think some folks are on this webinar that are actually working with tribes too. So we know that some people have a variety of experience. So that would be helpful too.
Yeah, it looks like we've got some folks who are working as an investor or a funder of a project, or maybe also looking for funding for a project. I love that you've joined, Kolia. Forgive me if I'm saying your name incorrectly. I love that you joined this webinar because it's never too soon to think about community outreach, even while you're looking for funding or even while you're starting to fund a project. A lot of times the community and how the community feels about the project will dictate whether investors are interested in being involved in the project and engaged in the project. And some other folks are typing right now too, Michelle. We'll just give them a little time to type in. Okay. So learning objective number 1. Let's see, James says he's at the phase of undertaking valuation assessment of distribution infrastructure on a reservation for possible purchase. Come on, James. That's a great, I love that. I just love that whole sentence. You're just speaking my language there on distribution systems. Looking to start interconnection application for solar project. That's great. Yeah, and definitely community engagement, especially if you're going to be working in distribution infrastructure, you know how people feel about their access to electricity and to power. And Michelle and I have definitely over the years worked with folks who, for one reason or another, were a little bit emotional and angry about about how the electrical system was being changed that was providing service to their house. So James, thanks for sharing that. Very, very helpful. All right. So learning objective number 1, we have 3 learning objectives today. Learning objective number 1 is to talk about community engagement approaches, principles, and ethics. Okay, Bill is saying my sound is starting to break up a little bit. So thanks for letting me know, Bill. You're awesome. There's a lot of reasons to engage with communities, especially tribal communities. And in our experience, working with communities that are right outside or adjacent to tribal lands is just as important as working with folks who are living on tribal lands and in the tribal community. And there's a resource I'm going to put in the chat for you. There's a group called the International Association for Public Participation. And it's a terrible acronym, my friends. It's called IAP2. And there's a lot of resources on their website. There's a US affiliate of this organization. And so there's a whole lot on principles and ethics that I encourage you to go and see. We will in future webinars be talking more in depth about that. But there are ethics and principles that govern community engagement. Just like, for example, there's ethics and approaches that govern project management. So if you have time after this webinar to go just Google IAP2, There's some really good, I'm going to give you a couple examples, really good principles that the organization has developed for those of us who are out in the field working with communities. So one of the principles that is my favorite is we don't turn community members against each other. So we don't manipulate in communities how people feel about the project by creating factions on purpose or accidentally. There's all kinds of good considerations for you to think about when you're out and engaging with communities. And then using community input, this is the third bullet right here. Using community input helps ensure that decisions are informed and that they reflect the needs and concerns of the communities that are impacted by your project. So if you have a freeway on or off ramp, you know that there's probably folks that are going to be impacted by that. Some folks will like it. It may be a benefit to them, and some folks might not like it. But taking into account folks' perspectives on your project is really important. So that's learning objective number 1 today. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about community engagement. And we'll talk about learning objectives number 2 and number 3 in a second.
I think, as participants on this webinar, I think sometimes people wonder, like, what is my purpose today on the webinar relative to community engagement? And I think sometimes people think that that's really a simple task about just sharing information about your project and then posting something on social media. And then in your mind, you're thinking, well, I posted that and you've given a written notice to the community and you're done. I mean, literally, I think sometimes we kind of say that I've communicated, right? One aspect of that. But however, it's really much more than that. And so why I sort of say that to you in terms of your purpose and what is your outcome today from the first series of this webinar is all of us know that public perception is very challenging in today's in any infrastructure project. Even not even communicating what the project's about, people have a perception of it right off the bat. And so I think identifying methods and techniques, which we're going to talk more about, and telling your story in the community is ever more important. And we really want to expand your skill set to communicate effectively and to a variety of audiences. But I think when I say variety of audiences, we're talking on the reservation, there's different communities and different people that are on the reservation that clearly have perceptions about energy development or infrastructure development, right? And so I think exploring those types of methods and really trying to enhance your techniques that result really in terms of ensuring that your project scope and budget and your timeline is what you've planned, and then you're executing in that way. So I really challenge all of you to be sort of creative with your storytelling and those communication strategies, because that's really how you're building your community engagement plan in the background of communication. And then really understanding sort of these types of approaches and techniques that are used, and sometimes being very intentional about the work that you do. Sometimes Kit and I are called in on projects that is really a crisis issue. And a lot of that can be mitigated early on if they really focused in the launch of the project and had that community engagement aspect, even on the pre-planning work. So I think if you're in the feasibility phase and you're looking at that type of aspect, you have to really look holistically, right, at your project, whatever it is, because there will be impacts into the communities or individuals on the reservation. So I think keeping that kind of perspective, I think sometimes we think it's a no-brainer, but then we've seen it just too many times. And I laugh, but it's difficult. It really is difficult in this time and age to sort of build and create projects and work with others trying to support your clean energy project or your energy project that you're trying to do. I'll hand it over to you if you have any comments on that, Kit.
No, I mean, I think, Michelle, I was just looking in the chat again, and Wendell Chino was saying on the project they're working on, they're in the phase of planning and starting to move into construction. And it's such a good time. It's such a good moment in the life of the project to start thinking about who's going to be impacted by the project, who knows about it, because sometimes these big projects are sometimes a little bit secret, right? Maybe not officially secret, but I have clients who will say to me, well, why would we tell people about a project that we're going to do? All it's going to do is stir up the opposition, right? Why would we tell folks early about a project that we're going to do? It's just going to give them time to mobilize against the project. So I'm just thinking about Wendell, sorry, I'm calling you out, but I'm just thinking about Wendell's project and how really telling folks early can be sort of counterintuitive. The earlier you can tell folks, generally, the more comfortable people will get with your project, because what you've given them is time. You've given them time to learn about your project. You've given them time to consider it. When we just sort of spring it on them, right? When like, here come the earth movers, it creates a very visceral and emotional kind of reaction in folks. So I would say, Wendell, you're in a great spot to start communicating with people about what the project is. And I would just add, sometimes you might not know exactly what it's going to be. Maybe you want to build a hotel and you just don't know how big the hotel is going to be. Like, you have plans, tribal leaders have thoughts. Michelle, I think that's happening with your tribe in Oklahoma. Even if you don't know it's going to be 8 stories tall and it's going to be this big and it's going to look like this, it's still never too early to start talking about what the project is. And then as it gets refined, you can share those refinements with the community. The approach that we're going to teach in this series will work on all kinds of projects. So we're not going to just teach you an approach to clean energy projects. I know that's the title of our webinar series, but all of the techniques and approaches that we use, Michelle and I have used on a wide variety: health, housing, bridges, roads. I put in the chat, I'm working right now on 2 quarries, both of which are in Northern California, neither of which is on tribal land. I don't think I've ever worked on 2 quarries before at the same time. People have a lot of ideas about what quarries are that are inaccurate. So communicating often with folks about really what is so about your project is important. And then over the course of the webinar series, we will be teaching you the process and the methodology that we use, and then you can use it. You don't need a doctorate in public policy to do this work. You just need to have an open heart and a willingness to talk to folks who might not right off the bat agree with you and might be a little bit in an emotional state. But we'll talk about that in future webinars. All right, community engagement approaches.
I just wanted to kind of go back about terminologies, because I think this is really important around the types of engagement plans. And so when I talk about public participation, like you'll hear it interchangeably. So I think this is really important because people talk about public participation, people talk about stakeholder engagement, consultation, and tribal consultation. And they all differ in key aspects. And it's really on the focus and the method and your outcomes, right? So tribes, I know tribes are very knowledgeable about tribal consultation because it's a government to government consultation. And that's not what we're talking about today. And we're talking about integrating engagement plans and community engagement. So when we talk about community engagement, and this is really important because I think when you start to talk to people about projects, some people will say consultation, and you may be in a position and you're representing the tribe, and someone who has never worked with a tribe doesn't even know about tribal consultation. But they're not really thinking about tribal consultation. They're talking about tribal engagement and how they're trying to engage all communities, right? And so sometimes these misinterpretations of terminology from the very get-go get in the way of how you want to be effective, even internally to a tribe, meaning in the tribe, because there will be certain kind of requirements. But what I would say that community engagement is really, it's a broader public participation process, meaning the public or your communities, and it's really voluntary. But unless it's required by like a specific regulation, and what I mean that, and for instance, would be if you have a grant requirement and the tribe was awarded a grant, sometimes in those requirements, it may ask you to prepare an engagement plan, but as part of your outcome of that. So this type of education and sharing here will help you sort of meet that, because sometimes you get these grants and you're like, what? I don't know anything about public participation. And so you're kind of making it up, right? And really, and I don't mean it in a derogatory sense, you're saying, well, how would I go about it? Social media. But really, when we talk about community engagement, there is an actual process as a project goes forward, and how you communicate in the early phases also to the end. And so for tribes, I think that's really applicable. But if you are also submitting for a grant, and then they're asking you in the narrative, have your description of your outreach in your pre-planning. And I think that's really important, and your duration of these elements to your project, and particularly an energy project where we, as in the tribal community, we have like, hey, there's a project that's being constructed near or around or close, and we didn't even know about the project. There really wasn't any information there was nothing in the paper, or they didn't even come to the tribe. I think we know that position, but I'm saying for your own community and your own plan, that's really important from the grant perspective, but it's also as you're sort of laying out the preparation of the work that you're going to do for the project. It's important that in your cost categories, we always forget to add in that type of work. And we all know that that type of work burns the hours of your project, because you're working on trying to address those issues, and you're really not moving the project forward. And this is where the community engagement aspects of really being thoughtful and being, as I mentioned, intentional about what does that really mean, because it happens. It happens far more than I think some of you may have had those experiences, and if you have, we'd like to sort of hear about that. But there are methods and how you lay out that approach for the tribe. And I think these foundational elements in creating that kind of plan, it's very specific to every tribe. It's not the same. I mean, there's same fundamental factors, but how you go about engaging certain communities is all going to be different, and then how tribes interface. And so that's what I think when Kit and I work with non-native clients that want to work with tribes, and the cultural competency piece of that for community engagement, you are either supporting the tribe or you're in the tribe, and then you're sort of, what do I do? And I think I know some folks that are on the webinar have had that experience and are very capable, but I don't think that these types of skill sets and methods are intuitive. It's something that you have to sort of work at in terms of building, I always say, your toolbox, your communication toolbox, and being thoughtful about how you bring consensus or knowledge forward in that way. So I just wanted to sort of mention that. And build that plan. And I think when you're building the plan, right, you're actually writing the narrative. You're really writing down how you're going to approach that.
So Michelle, yeah, Wendell put a really good, I love this sentence, Wendell, that you put in the chat. So thank you for your contribution. Wendell says, we have quarterly tribal/community meetings, which, by the way, I love that you do that. And they are aware of projects, and we let them know it is for the better of our people. And I think that's brilliant. I mean, I love that there's first of all, what I'm seeing in your comment is there's a regular cadence. So there's quarterly meetings. These are meetings that people know are regularly scheduled. They know when the next one is. They know when the last one was. That kind of predictability of communication, that kind of regular cadence of communication is so important. And then having folks know the why. I think maybe, Wendell, you should co-teach our next webinar in December with us and share what you've been doing to keep people informed, because this is great. But knowing the why of the project, letting folks know that it's for the betterment of people who maybe tribal members may not be as well. Why are we doing it? And who's it going to benefit? And sometimes communities can be really short-sighted about the benefits and the costs of projects. So Wendell, thank you so much for sharing that. And if anybody else out on the webinar has examples of regular meetings that you have, or maybe calling meetings at the last minute just to keep everybody updated on changes in the project, please share those in the chat, because those really help us too.
Hey, I also wanted to sort of say, you may be in a position where you are hiring contractors or subcontractors for your grant or for whatever funding. And so, again, it's great that if they have tribal experience or have worked in communities or communities that may not even be tribe, but they understand the cultural competencies of that. That's wonderful. But it's been my experience over the years that they're few and far between. So
Michelle, 100%. I was just thinking about, remember you and I got hired to go in and essentially clean up a situation for a client where when the client hired me and Michelle said, oh, we're doing tribal consultation. We're doing it. We're doing outreach and engagement. We're doing tribal consultation. And in fact, I'm not sure what they thought tribal consultation was, but it certainly wasn't what they were doing.
No,
right?
No.
Please go ahead.
It caused a lot of issues. So there's this assumption, or I know, I've read something, or I know what that is, as I mentioned in our definitions. There were some requirements for consultation, but how they did the consultation was not, they did not follow the regulations. For us in community, for us as we're talking about community engagement, it's not a really right or wrong, right? It's more about, are you able to work in the community to get moving on your project and, eliminate those barriers, potential barriers or opposition, or to let people know about the project just generally, so that people are curious and they want to know. And sometimes decisions are made at tribal council level and it's not communicated in normal communications, or grants approved and you find it out by the agenda on the tribal council. What's that about? And you haven't even had a chance. That's why I talk about perception. It's like what's happening there, and then you're the individual and the project manager that's responsible for that. So early engagement is important relative to that. But I think I'm ready to go to the next slide, Kit.
Sure, I am too, Michelle. I just want to acknowledge James put in the chat. James, if it's okay, I'm just going to read it. We held a community referendum to exit our non-native owned utility. By the way, great job. That's amazing. That's not easy to do. And form our own tribal electric utility. It passed, the referendum passed, but that was 16 years ago. And we are now in a position to act on it. I love this. This is so interesting because 16 years ago, there was this momentum. There was this referendum. People voted. And maybe some of the folks today in your community remember that, and maybe some of them don't. Even folks that were there at the time that it was happening may not remember that it happened. So I find that clients often assume, well, we went out 10 years ago and told everybody about this about this quarry.
Right.
And it's like, the folks' memories might not be that long. So you obviously, James, had an opportunity to educate people 16 years ago. It worked great. And maybe there's now an opportunity to just bring folks up to speed about, like, oh, we decided this as a community. And now, based on what we decided as a community, we're going to take these steps. You're going to see these things happening. We actually are doing what you directed us to do, which is always great for communities to hear that they had a say, and then what they said they wanted, they're actually going to get it, right? That's very powerful for people to know that their say made a difference.
I think also, though, too, that we know that energy projects take a long time, like energy just generally, right? When you're building energy, you're trying to find funding, and then in funding, you're doing your feasibility, and then there's a momentum. Maybe the council that at that time had an energy champion, or maybe it's a Section 17 or the business development side of the tribe is driving the initiatives. And some tribes are far more sophisticated than others, and they really have hired people that have that background. But a lot of tribes are not in that position in tribal capacity. I mean, even if they are sort of moving in that direction, for whatever purposes and priorities of the tribe, then energy is not the focus anymore. But I think now in this environment, energy self-sufficiency, tribal energy sovereignty in terms of outages, backup, safety for the community, it does have a different sort of approach than it was even 10 years ago. And then exercising what James talking about, it took 16 years to take that in action, and then actually working with the utility and working and navigating that. That's pretty remarkable. You're hearing more stories about that, but I have to. That's really good to hear that. But going into this next slide, I think some of you that are working with tribes or with them, looking at these slides about addressing the codes and the regulations, we'll talk about this more in the next webinar, but this is again today to kind of set the foundational pieces of this. But when you're checking the codes and regulations and how you're verifying and incorporating it into your engagement plan, I just kind of want to highlight a couple of points that you should be thinking about, and maybe you have, and if so, would like to hear that. But I do believe what's different in regular energy, when I say energy projects that are not on reservation or tribal lands, on tribal lands is very distinct in the sense that sometimes when you're interfacing with a tribe or working for a tribe, sometimes these traditional business or traditional decision-making processes are different, and how they come to a decision in their own traditional ways and their tribal customs. I think that's really important to respect that and understand that. And then sometimes you can go to the tribal council or to kind of move it forward, but the governance structures are very different. So understanding that, and sometimes even in you work for tribe, really understanding the governance piece of the Constitution or the governing documents of what you're looking at is important. So is there a general council? Is this tribe set up with districts? Or are there certain requirements about how they meet in terms of different locations of a very large land-based tribe? Is there a way that they like to conduct their community comment periods? some tribes that I've worked with, you know, there are certain things and you have to have it done a certain way in a certain form. And then you present it, then they go out themselves to advertise or to promote that. And so I think some are very specific about that, and then there's specific processes. So I think as you're sort of looking at that and staying in alignment with that tribe, if you're for the tribe, working for the tribe or with a tribe, those are things that you're needing to look at just overall in terms of how you're moving forward. But in the engagement piece of that, you want to align that and understand that. I think in this, and some are more mainstreamed and or operate in a more Western approach, I would say, and others still don't. I think other considerations are like clans or ceremonial requirements. I think Mr. Chino, being from Pueblo, there's definitely distinctions of the governance versus the spiritual and ceremonial sects, and they have influence, informal influence in the community. Understanding how you operate with different tribes and the way they function is very important in terms of your engagement. And then also, we know how important elders are in our communities, and there are sometimes elder council reviews, elder council committees. Sometimes there are respected former officials because they want to utilize their experience. There's that aspect. But I think also what's important to know and acknowledge is the cultural protocols of gathering community input in terms of how you do that in a way, and understanding that. I think how Kit and I have had to sort of navigate the energy sector and also working with tribes, and how you sort of have to bring the information together and then moving forward in terms of all the parties are at a place, because the motivation and the desire for certain types of work is different, right? We know that. And I think early to sort of move the tribe, but again, we're talking about projects on tribal land, so there is definitely an effort afoot there for tribes wanting to advance that. As you're yeah.
Sorry, Michelle, please finish your thought. My apologies.
No, go right ahead. If you wanted to make a comment on that, that's fine.
I was just reading, I know you and I wrote these bullets, but I was just reading bullet number 1 here on the left-hand side. And I noticed the word consensus. And I just wanted to make sure that when we're talking about doing community engagement, I just made that go in a little bit. Hang on, let me just adjust that. Sometimes folks that I consult with think that the point is to get everybody to love the project, to get everybody feeling exactly the same way, to have sort of unanimous approval of the project by the community. And in some instances, I think that is necessary. But a lot of what happens with community engagement is that by just educating people and giving folks facts and greater understanding about the project, you can, and now I'm moving over to this 4th bullet on the far right-hand side, you can address and resolve issues ahead of time. So when my clients say, well, we want you to convince everybody in Santa Rosa to love quarries. I'm like, not going to happen. Not going to happen. But what I can do is I can teach folks about why quarries are important and what we use quarry products like gravel and sand and big rocks, what we use it for. So I know we'll talk more about this in future webinars, but if you're thinking to yourself, I can't believe Michelle and Kit are telling me that I have to do whatever I can to get everybody to, love this distribution system upgrade. You don't have to have unanimous consensus, but you do have responsibility in doing community engagement to ensure that folks are well informed. And for those of you in the chat, and thank you, Kalia, for And I apologize if I'm saying your name incorrectly. I'm so glad you're here, and I appreciate that you just put who you were in the chat. But I'm in the chat. I'm putting some of the IAP2 Code of Ethics, just so you can read them while we're talking and consider them for yourself. And I think one that particularly applies to what Michelle has been talking about is, where did I put it here? Is Code of Ethics number 5, openness. So encouraging the disclosure of all the information such that people have an understanding of the project and can make up their own mind about it. So Michelle, if you can indulge me for 2 seconds, I just want to give you an example. I'm working on a battery energy storage project down in Orange County,
California.
And in Orange County, California, thank you, not Orange County, Florida. And my client, bless their hearts, did not tell the community really what this battery energy storage project was when they started working on the project. So the community, because nobody was talking to them, so the community in this vacuum of information decided that the project, it's a battery energy storage project, very safe. The community decided it was a lithium battery factory that was being built by Elon Musk, and that it would have surveillance such that the battery energy storage facility would be doing surveillance of the neighbors, the residents who were nearby the facility, and then would be reporting that surveillance information to folks who were based in China. Now, all of us here are smart people, and we know that probably none of that is likely. And in fact, it's not, because this is a battery energy storage project. There will be surveillance, but it will be of the facility itself, of course, not the neighbors. But I just share that as an example of what happens when you don't exercise Code of Ethics number 5, openness, and share early and often with the public what the project is and isn't. Folks are going to make up their own minds. And now that folks have made up their minds about what this project is, even though it's not factually correct what they think the project is, there have been over 1,000 letters from residents sent to the California Energy Commission opposing this project based on the false information about what the project is. And it breaks my heart, because these are people who are taking time out of their busy day to actually send a letter and participate in government, right? Except that we didn't tell them soon enough what the project actually was. So thank you for indulging me, Michelle.
Yeah, so we try to avoid those as much as we can. But
oh my gosh, yes.
It happens. But I think going back to like cultural protocols and how I was mentioning how you gather that community input, and I think how those cultural considerations about either it be language appropriate, right? Sometimes certain keywords in the traditional sense, understanding that, making that effort to sort of respect that, and also perhaps there are traditional meeting formats that how tribes sort of convene. And of course, now as we're going into seasons, the seasonal aspects of timing, right? As we're going into certain tribes in the harvest, into the fall, into the winter, all of these, what people can speak about or not speak about, it is relevant to your engagement, right? How you go about that and being mindful. I wanted to just also mention one of the areas of the land use planning as you're putting your team together, for your clean energy project. A lot of times, well, I shouldn't say a lot of times, but people are very siloed wherever you're at, whatever organization or whatever tribal you're doing healthcare, or you got assigned a project. There's really not an energy department or a utility department, but you need to go work with natural resources department and understand, and you don't really maybe not know what they do, or you need to kind of understand the focus of what they do. but really understanding the ecological knowledge. This is where you're that's your engagement plan internally as well. It's not always externally, but you're trying to get buy-in and making sure that you're touching those points with your clean energy project, right? In terms of wildlife, natural resources, all of those factors, which are very important to tribes. So you're balancing between economic development, where the project can be built, where we're looking at where the best site selection would be, but all of these factors play into your engagement. You might not think about that, but I think as you're sort of evaluating your project and looking at tribal governance and those regulations, you really need to make sure that you're consistent and inclusive in your plan and open about this is the project, because oftentimes if you have a tribal historic preservation officer, or you don't, or you may have a cultural elder that knows certain areas that shouldn't be built on, but then, perhaps infrastructure around the reservation, it looks really like this is a really great spot in terms of everything, then you may need to reevaluate where that project's going to go. And so I think most people think, oh yeah, avoid cultural sites, but I think also the natural resource aspects of it is really important as well. But I'm talking about these principles and these items, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But sometimes tribes may not have the detail in the regulation, and some really do. Some have some very sophisticated codes, environmental processes, permits. So even if you're working on a project, you want to incorporate that into your engagement plan to make sure that the project team sees that, knows that, and is able to, let's say, for instance, an excavation permit, employment in the taro, the TIPO, all of that is what I would say is the engagement plan internally to get consensus about moving and being very deliberate and intentional about the work, and also with your subcontractors. So people always think about, I'm going to communicate about a plan, and it's always this external community. No, I really say it's really, again, I go back to that holistic approach and those principles around those processes in the community. And there are foundational aspects, but you do need to take the time, and then also being able to educate your subcontractors that are working to understand these are requirements on the reservation, and that's part of the engagement. It's a stop if you're not really effectively bringing along the resources in the energy industry, and they're not really understanding what that even means, right? Mm-hmm. So there's that part of it as well.
So Michelle, Matt Dannenberg, and thank you, Matt, shared a really interesting comment in the chat. And they said, sometimes there's buy-in by one branch of tribal government, but not another. And I think that's such an interesting aspect of engagement, because in some instances, Michelle and I'm just thinking about a project we worked on in Northern California together, had to get more buy-in inside tribal leadership than we did have to get out in the tribal community as a whole. And so I think that's a great comment, Matt. And then I added a comment. Do you find that sometimes the communication inside tribal leadership can be a challenge? And I in my experience working with Michelle, I have found it sometimes is even more of a challenge. And Matt, your comment, you said yes, and you need to be careful about navigating the politics among the elected leadership. Yes, Matt, I think you should teach a webinar about this. And I'm not kidding. I mean, I also think Wendell needs to. It was James. James.
I think Wendell. Yeah, Wendell too.
Wendell too, yeah. And probably Bill too, because he's just such a good cheerleader for everybody. But I think, Matt, there have to be some very specific approaches to navigating among the elected leadership inside tribes. And I bet Oh, and Brooke just put her email in the chat, y'all, so you can pitch her webinar ideas, which is awesome.
Yes.
That maybe, Matt, you've used that have worked. I think the other thing that's really helpful for folks is to learn about the approaches that haven't worked. I've had some pretty massive failures in my career. I could do an entire webinar series on my failures and would be glad to. I've had some front page of the New York Times failures, but those, you learn from those. And then once you learn what not to do, you can sometimes get more effective and more focused on what to do in the next instance. So I think, Matt, you hit right on what this third bullet is right here about educating tribal members. What I probably should do is edit this slide and have it say tribal members and leaders, right? Because it's talking really straightforwardly with everybody about the project. And Matt, thanks for being on the webinar, and I totally understand that you need to hop off.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being on. So learning objective number 2, and I promise we're getting close to the end, y'all, because I know your time is really valuable and you all are very busy working on your projects. But Michelle, do you want to talk about learning objective number 2 just a little bit?
Well, I think I was sort of leading into that about the communication protocols of tribal projects and and these are unique considerations with respect to the cultural traditions and tribal governance that I sort of mentioned in the previous slide. But I think in these fundamentals is like, we've talked about cultural significance, the tribal sovereignty considerations, you're looking at environmental factors, what is the community impact, what is the legal framework around the tribe, some of the aspects to that, and some of the infrastructure considerations, as we talked in an earlier slide, about where from energy infrastructure, right? Where the substation, we're adjacent to transmission lines, distribution lines, all that comes into the infrastructure considerations. And then really for tribes, what are the economic factors around your projects, like the impact of economic development? And then really in your planning, how you view that relative to future development. And tribes, I think, are still growing. Their communities are growing. I think I don't know the population, but we still have the population of youth and the age between below 18, and then we're having more tribal members in these communities and more services that need to be provided and infrastructure projects to meet sort of healthcare, facilities, or also being able, as I mentioned, that if you're worried and concerned about backup power at critical facilities. These are sort of all of these fundamentals that we'll talk a little bit more that are really part of the site selection and the project planning. And in some of these slides, I've sort of mentioned about how you need to bring together the team, but then also as you're evaluating the infrastructure. So all of that is a lot in your plan, an engagement plan, but you're taking it from your feasibility and then you're moving it from feasibility to implementation, bringing in your engagement strategy, project managing the work. So there's a lot of factors that play into that in terms of the site selection. And again, in energy, right, Kit and I have worked on teams, very large projects, transmission investment projects in the utility that we used to work for, where it really takes the project team or subcontractors to sort of move it, but ultimately the tribe drives that. And sometimes we don't have the resources that are available as we in the energy industry, And so how do you sort of navigate that, right? What are the resources and communicating that, right? Being on point. And sometimes you're given a project, and in your site selection, if you've never worked on those types of projects, it's like learning as you go. And unfortunately, that happens. But these are just sort of the factors that I wanted to sort of emphasize on the learning objective 2 as we sort of move forward in the next webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And I just put in the chat, if folks could go to the chat and just let us know just briefly how your projects you're working on are being funded. Is it philanthropy, state grants, federal grants, self-funded? Because the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about timelines, and how your project is funded really impacts your timelines and how you're tracking with your timelines and milestones that maybe you already have in your project plan. And then also James put in the chat, one challenge I have identified is how to effectively use social media to engage the community, especially younger people. So James, I'm just gonna say, I'm with you here. Michelle and I have found this very challenging as well. You're not alone. And I don't think that Michelle and I are finding it challenging just because we're old. I think we're finding it challenging because having folks in tribal leadership be okay with communicating to the community about the project using social media can sometimes require educating tribal leaders about what social media is great for and what it's not great for. And we've come up against this challenge so many times working for tribes that are governed by folks who are a little bit older. And I'm almost 60. So I didn't grow up with social media. I didn't even grow up with a cell phone. So trying to share with folks why communicating on social media is important can be hard, especially when the leadership is not bought in on communicating that way. Randy, yeah. Sorry, Michelle, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm working right now with a client that has a project on tribal land, and there is an environmental justice group that is really attacking the project for a long time, and the facts that they've provided is incorrect. So I am the tribal affairs representative and have worked for the tribe. I have a good relationship with the tribe and fostering that. But there's just a lot of social media and a lot of information that's not correct. And so it's a very sensitive and moving forward in this kind of negotiation of a land lease and energy project. And the tribe is silent. But, you know, I have to be respectful of how the tribe approaches, and sort of how do we work with a social, like environmental justice group that doesn't have sensitivity or understanding about tribal sovereignty, right? The companies brought me on so that we have that relationship. And so there's a lot of different factors that are out there. And so, you know, things went on the media, things were in print. And so one of my objectives in terms of the engagement is to say, we need to sort of sit down now and come together to have a plan. So that's not uncommon when you have a lot of adversity to energy projects and they don't understand really what's really happening, nor should they. That is a relationship between a developer, the company, and the tribe. But it makes it very difficult to sort of move projects forward and having alignment there. So it's not uncommon. And we just sort of evaluate that as, and sometimes these things come up and you least expect, oh, why would they have an interest? Well, they do because they have a certain initiative and a policy or social stance on just energy projects in general. And that can affect the tribal projects because they don't really know about the projects or even know how tribes function just generally.
Yeah. And And I think separating fact from fiction is especially hard right now. And there's a bunch of chat happening right now back and forth about social media, about conjecture and gossip. I obviously shared my example of the battery energy storage project when folks just made up out of nothing what the project was when the communication wasn't great about really what it was. And increasing polarization in society as a whole can make social media especially tricky. And we will be talking about different channels. So social media is considered a channel, different channels of communication, some of which have been mentioned today, like having internal meetings, like a newsletter, like having quarterly meetings with the community. Social
and I think that's
like another channel. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think as that leads into the objective 3, how do you keep the project timeline and you're assessing your infrastructure needs as you're sort of facing these are real impacts that you're sort of trying to mitigate as you're sort of going through your project work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Leah shared that her project, Leah, or their project, I'm sorry, I don't know your gender, is federal grant funded. And so that layers an extra level of complexity, right, on top of your timelines and on top of assessing your infrastructure needs. Because not only do you have to be responsive to the tribe or the community, but you're also having to be responsive to whoever gave you the grant and make those deadlines and comply with their requirements as well.
Yeah, I know, Kit, we're coming up on our 15 minutes of closing our 90
know,
minutes, and we were wondering, like, I think most of you have stayed on the whole entire time.
Thank you. Thank you for your
and also the engagement and listening in, and even if you're tuning into us and you're not and hearing, we really do hearing, and you're working multitasking. I know sometimes I'm in situations where I'm listening to the webinar, I'm like trying to hit something. We really hope that one thing resonated with you today, or a couple of things resonated with you today, as we're sort of closing in on our summary. And so I'll let Kit lead this, and then we'll continue to close out the conversation in our time with you today.
I think we hit on this one. Community engagement is no longer optional from our perspective on most projects. I think we hit on that pretty hard. So I bet they got it. And done right, community engagement can help keep your project on schedule, on budget, complying with timelines. We have seen so many times not doing community engagement and then having to catch up and do it all of a sudden in a project just puts all of the schedule, budget, and timelines, like wipes them off the map, just can ruin the level of planning that's been done on the project. So including community engagement so that you can keep your project on scope, on schedule, on budget. And then planning, site selection, timelines, construction, all deeply impacted by community impact. And I love y'all are sharing your emails in the chat.
That's awesome.
I think it's so great. And I'm going to just put mine here. And our last slide has our email and our phones and a QR code. We love talking about projects. I love sharing my failures. As you know, I'm going to share some specifically in the next webinar, so that you can learn from all of the mistakes that I've made. And then Michelle's just tremendous amount of experience working on energy projects. It's unfathomable to me. She has forgotten more than I will ever know about energy projects. So please call on both of us in between these webinars. Our next one is December. So if you need some help, December 11th. Yeah. If you need some help in the meantime, please don't hesitate to reach out to either of us. Can y'all go to the chat one more time?
Yes.
I promise this will be the last time. So can you put a couple words in the chat about what you're taking away from today?
Yeah, I think one key takeaway, I think it's really helpful. I think if you've been listening and participating and being an active listener, thank you for staying with us during this 90-minute time. But if there's something that you can put in the chat, we'd really like to get the feedback.
Yeah.
And it could be one word. It could be something that you, helpful, or whatever you would like to share with the community that we're here talking with you and with us.
And I just made a note, Michelle, that for the next webinar that we specifically do talk about social media. I know we were planning on it, but I think talking more than maybe we had planned a little bit more would be helpful, because obviously that was a topic that came up today. So we want to respond to your needs, right? Not just what we want to tell you.
Exactly. I think that's part of why we why the approach that Kit and I use in the chat, right? We want to engage you. I mean, we want to, of course, share our knowledge and share approach, and we'll get a little bit more in the webinar, the second webinar. And really the second webinar sort of builds on the foundation we sort of talked about. And it's really increasing your knowledge and your skills, understanding about the project's critical elements, like we talked about the scope, and then mapping out your stakeholders and looking at influence versus impact, right? And there is a process that you do that in your evaluation and how you engage, or how you're working with tribal council, right? Sometimes there'll be a question that comes in, and then you're the one that needs to follow up. What is the impact, and what is the influence of the individual that you're looking at? How is that person harmful or helpful? And you have to be open and communicate with them. You have to understand that context, which I think was brought up in terms of the tribal politics aspect. But either way, you're looking at the project overall, and we will be sort of really focusing on that and doing the mapping and identifying your stakeholders. So in this next session of the webinar, we hope you return, and we hope that you bring your mapping, you're ready to go, and then we'll go through the exercise. I think that's really important. And even if it's you're jotting down points, it's really helping reinforce in your mind aspects of your project, and then being proactive, and again, being intentional about your communications and your engaging in the community.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Michelle. Brooke, should we hand it over to you to close out? I know you put a feedback survey in the chat, which would be great if folks could take that.
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free, folks, to keep asking your questions in the chat while Michelle and Kit are still on the call. But I just have a few things for you. I did put the link to today's webinar feedback survey in the chat for you. You can't click it like on the slide on the screen, but you can click it in the chat. And if you are to download the slides, you could click it in there as well. It is an anonymous survey, so no worries about your name or your email being connected to anything. It takes about 2 to 3 minutes to complete, and it's just something that lets us at the Native Learning Center know what's working well and what we can improve upon for the future. We do also share the feedback with our instructors, so it helps everybody all around. So we hope that you can take a few minutes to complete that for us. Again, the link is in the chat as well as in the shared notes. We hope you can join us for our next impending webinar, which is going to be next week on October 7th. And this actually ties pretty nicely into y'all's. And this is on how to build a good development team. And this will be with Kelly Pirelli. And she's executive director of Visionary Ventures, which is a not-for-profit, and of the owner of Turtle Clan Development Services. So our webinar times are always the same. So it's going to be 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 10 a.m. Alaska. You will be able to check out this one as well as our other recorded webinars on our YouTube channel. There's a whole playlist called the Cathedral Webinar Archive. It goes back through our webinars for the past 2 years. The recording is going to take about overnight to generate, but I will post it to the YouTube as well as posting it here on the platform in the course tomorrow morning, first thing when I get in. We hope you can check out our other upcoming training events, We post about them on our various social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. If you are somebody who likes to listen to podcasts, We do have our own in-house produced podcast, the Hope a Thing, a Native American podcast. You could listen to that wherever you listen to your podcasts. And then if you actually like to watch the interviews with our special guests, we post those to our YouTube channel as well. But that is all I have for the outro. I'm going to hang on here since you guys have great questions in the chat, but I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and go off camera. I am going to keep recording just in case any of these questions are something that might pop up for somebody else and it'll help them. But thank you everybody for joining today.
Thank you, Brooke. And thank you, Wendell. I really liked your comment in the chat about needing more time for discussion. I think that's such good feedback. We appreciate that. And I just put back in the chat that maybe we actually just have a discussion in our next webinar. We're designing it, so we can make it what we want. So maybe we take on a case study. And if anybody has a case study that they would like to share where it went great or maybe where it didn't go great, we'd love to hear from you. And we're happy to incorporate that because we want this to be as usable and actionable for you as possible, so that when you're spending your hour or 90 minutes with us, you walk away with actual things that you can do and implement in your work. And thank you for everybody being here. Michelle?
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you I really enjoyed your interactiveness on the chat.
Mm-hmm.
We're very hopeful that this was in the Native Learning Center community, something that would be of interest. And for us, we want to hear and then also help. And again, some of the communications that you've shared with us today, we're with you. We're there with you, understanding that situation. And sometimes the greater community in Indian country are doing certain things, and you're doing the same thing, but you don't really know. And that's what I like about the Native Learning Center and their mission about sharing information. And again, it doesn't cost the tribe. You could go to another webinar and pay for that. I mean, from our position is as instructors, we really want to impart information and help you where you're at in your project. And so whatever we can do to sort of advance that for yourself and use our knowledge to help you, that's really what it's about for us and creating this webinar series. And taking away information that's relevant to you. Not all of it could be where you're at, but I think what's really great about the library is that you can go back and then look at places that might, and then take that information and then use it to enhance where you're at in your projects or your planning.
That's great. Wendell, thank you for saying that y'all need another webinar with us. That's very kind. And luckily there will be one on December 11th. So we will be haunting the NLC webinar website for sure. And please go and take the survey. We would appreciate it. And I hope everybody goes on and has a great Thursday and have a really beautiful weekend. Hope to see you on the 11th.